For millennia, humanity has reached for the sky, pushed boundaries, and defied the very earth beneath our feet. We've built monuments to gods, kings, empires, and ideologies, structures designed to inspire awe, project power, or simply fulfill an impossible dream. But sometimes, in that relentless pursuit of glory, innovation, or necessity, we've constructed something far more sinister: death traps. Buildings where the very walls seem to whisper warnings, where every step carried unseen peril, and where the line between architectural marvel and death trap became terrifyingly thin. Welcome, history explorers, to Pratik History. Today, we delve into the shadows cast by towering ambition to uncover history's most dangerous buildings. These aren't merely structures that collapsed under neglect or natural disaster long after their prime. These are buildings conceived, constructed, and occupied with inherent, often deadly, flaws woven into their very fabric. Flaws born from hubris, ignorance, desperation, or sheer disregard for human life. Prepare to journey from ancient tombs to modern nightmares, from palaces dripping in gold to factories choked with poison, as we explore the dark legacy of architecture, when safety was sacrificed at the altar of something else. Our story begins not with industrial chimneys, but with sun-baked stone, and the quest for immortality. Consider the Great Pyramids of Giza, majestic, enduring, symbols of unparalleled ancient engineering. Yet, their construction was arguably one of history's first and largest-scale industrial disasters. While the final resting place of the pharaoh was designed to be impenetrable, the process of building it was a relentless, decades-long meat grinder. Imagine the scene: tens of thousands of conscripted laborers and skilled workers toiling under the relentless Egyptian sun, quarrying massive limestone and granite blocks using primitive copper tools and brute force, transporting these multi-ton behemoths on wooden sledges across desert sands, lubricated perhaps by water, but more likely by the sweat and blood of those pulling them. Ramps, built of mud brick and rubble, snaking up the growing pyramid face at alarming angles. The logistics alone boggle the mind. A single misplaced block, a fraying rope, a collapsing section of ramp, could mean instant death for dozens. Accidents were constant. Crushing injuries, falls from dizzying heights, heat stroke, and exhaustion were daily companions. While estimates vary wildly, the human cost over the 20-plus years of construction for the Great Pyramid of Khufu alone likely ran into the thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. The pyramid itself, once sealed, became a deadly puzzle box for tomb robbers for millennia, filled with hidden shafts, portcullises, and crushing counterweights. It stood as a monument not just to a god-king, but to the staggering, perilous cost of achieving the impossible. Centuries later, but driven by a similar impulse to reach the heavens and appease the divine, medieval Europe embarked on its own perilous architectural race: the construction of Gothic cathedrals. Think of the soaring vaults of Notre Dame de Paris, the impossibly tall spire of Strasbourg, or the intricate lacework of stone at Chartres. These were feats of faith, engineering, and community effort, but they were also death traps in the making. Particularly during their construction, master masons pushed the limits of known physics. Flying buttresses, revolutionary for distributing weight, were experiments conducted hundreds of feet in the air. Scaffolding, made of lashed timber poles and planks, clung precariously to dizzying heights, vulnerable to wind, rot, and human error. Stone blocks, hoisted by primitive cranes, powered by men or animals walking in giant treadwheels, swung perilously overhead. A snapped rope, a sudden gust, a misplaced foot on the scaffolding, and tragedy would plummet from the sky. Falls were the most common cause of death, crushing workers and bystanders below. Stone cutters developed debilitating lung diseases from silica dust. The sheer duration of construction, often spanning over a century, meant generations of workers lived and died on these perilous sites. While no single catastrophic collapse defines the Gothic era, though partial collapses did occur, like at Beauvais Cathedral, the cumulative death toll across Europe's great cathedral building sites was undoubtedly immense. The finished cathedrals, while structurally sound for their time, also presented dangers: towering spires, attracting lightning strikes before proper conductors, lead roofing leaching poison, and the ever-present risk of fire. In timber-roofed naves, they reached towards God, but the path to their completion was paved with mortal peril. Hubris wasn't confined to tombs or churches. It found fertile ground in the courts of absolute monarchs. Enter Versailles, the glittering, gilded cage built by Louis XIV. While not dangerous in the traditional structural sense during its prime, Versailles was a masterpiece of calculated risk and toxic environment. Its construction, draining the marshlands of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, created a perfect breeding ground for disease-carrying mosquitoes. Malaria, then known as marsh fever, was rampant, claiming countless construction workers and later afflicting courtiers. The sheer scale and speed of construction, demanded under the Sun King, led to inevitable shortcuts and accidents. But the true danger of Versailles lay within its opulent walls. It was a pressure cooker. The palace was chronically overcrowded, housing thousands of nobles, servants, soldiers, and hangers-on in spaces never designed for such numbers. Sanitation was medieval at best. Chamber pots were emptied haphazardly into courtyards or directly out of windows, despite ordinances. Elaborate latrines existed but were insufficient and poorly maintained. Human waste festered in corridors and stairwells. The stench, especially in summer, was legendary and described as unbearable. This squalor was a petri dish for disease. Smallpox, dysentery, typhus, and other contagions swept through the palace with terrifying regularity. Courtiers lived in constant fear of illness, often fleeing outbreaks. The palace layout itself, with its endless corridors, mirrored halls, and hidden passages, fostered intrigue, paranoia, and sometimes literal danger. Duels and assassinations were not unheard of. Versailles was a monument to power, yes, but also to the perilous consequences of concentrating too much ambition, too many people, and too little regard for basic hygiene in one gloriously unhealthy environment. Versailles also hosted spectacular entertainments, often involving fire. Fireworks displays, while dazzling, were notoriously unpredictable. Accidents were frequent, causing severe burns and sometimes fatalities among both the pyrotechnicians and spectators crammed to close. The palace itself, a tinderbox of wood, tapestries, and crowded spaces, lived under the constant shadow of devastating fire, a threat that would tragically materialize centuries later. The danger at Versailles wasn't a single collapsing beam, it was the slow, insidious, and often spectacularly explosive consequence of unchecked extravagance and neglect. As the world shifted from divine right to industrial might, the nature of dangerous buildings transformed. The factory became the new cathedral, and its dangers were often coldly calculated into the bottom line. Nowhere exemplifies this more horrifically than the Triangle Shirtwaist factory in New York City, occupying the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of the Ash Building, now the Brown Building, in Greenwich Village. It was a typical early 20th century sweatshop. Hundreds of workers, mostly young immigrant women and girls, toiled long hours sewing shirtwaists, blouses, for meager pay and cramped, hazardous conditions. The building itself wasn't structurally unsound. Its danger was a direct result of greed and criminal negligence. Fire hazards were everywhere, flammable fabric scraps littered the floors, cutting tables were piled high with material, oil from sewing machines dripped onto wood floors. There were no sprinklers. Fire drills were non-existent, but the most lethal design choices were deliberate. Locked exit doors. Management claimed this was to prevent theft and unauthorized breaks. Stairwells were narrow and poorly maintained. The single exterior fire escape was flimsy, poorly designed, and collapsed under the weight of fleeing workers. On March 25, 1911, a fire started, likely from a discarded cigarette or match, in a scrap bin on the 8th floor. It spread with terrifying speed through the tinderbox workspace. Workers on the 9th floor received no warning until smoke and flames engulfed them. The locked doors sealed their fate. Trapped, workers faced an impossible choice: burn alive or jump from the windows. 146 people perished that day, 123 women and 23 men. Most were teenagers or in their early 20s. The images of bodies on the sidewalk and dangling from the broken fire escape shocked the nation and galvanized the labor movement, leading to sweeping fire safety reforms. The Ash Building stands today, a silent, unassuming structure housing NYU classrooms, a stark, chilling reminder of how a building, through deliberate human choices, became an instrument of mass death. The industrial era's dangers weren't confined to fire. Sometimes, the poison was in the very materials used. Consider the fate of workers involved with radium dial factories in the early 20th century, particularly in the U.S. Buildings like the one in Orange, New Jersey, or Ottawa, Illinois, seemed like clean, modern workplaces. Young women, known as the Radium Girls, were hired to paint watch dials and instrument panels with luminous radium paint. The work was well paid and considered glamorous. The danger was invisible, tasteless, and odorless. The workers were instructed to use a technique called lip pointing, using their lips and tongues to shape the fine paintbrush tips to a point, ingesting minute amounts of radium with every lick. They also painted their nails, faces, and even teeth for fun with the glowing substance, unaware of its lethal nature. Radium, a potent alpha emitter, is chemically similar to calcium. Once ingested, it deposited in bones, teeth, and tissues, bombarding cells with radiation from within. The factories themselves became contaminated, dust settled everywhere. Management, often aware of the dangers, scientists like Marie Curie suffered radiation burns, and radium was known to be harmful, actively concealed the risks. They provided no protective gear, encouraged the lip pointing, and even hired company doctors to misdiagnose the women's mounting health problems as syphilis or other ailments to discredit them. The results were horrific and agonizing: severe anemia, debilitating bone fractures and necrosis, jawbones literally crumbling away, massive tumors, and ultimately, painful deaths. The buildings weren't collapsing, they were slow-motion gas chambers, radiating death long after the workers went home. The Radium Girls' courageous fight for justice exposed the horrors of industrial radium poisoning and laid crucial groundwork for modern occupational safety standards. The factories themselves, though perhaps demolished or repurposed, stand as monuments to corporate malfeasance and the insidious danger of invisible toxins within seemingly ordinary walls. The pursuit of military advantage created its own uniquely dangerous structures. Deep beneath the windswept Orkney Islands in Scotland lies HMS Proteus, also known as the Causewayed Shelter. Built during World War II, this wasn't a ship, but a massive, bomb-proof concrete structure designed to store and service miniature submarines, X-craft, used in daring raids. Its danger wasn't structural failure, but its purpose and the volatile cargo it contained. Proteus was essentially a giant, reinforced concrete box divided into sections, submerged in a flooded basin and accessed via a causeway. Inside, engineers worked on the complex, temperamental X-craft, fueled by highly volatile high-test peroxide, HTP. HTP is an extremely powerful, but notoriously unstable oxidizer. It can decompose explosively if contaminated by even trace amounts of impurities. Working on experimental submarines powered by this substance, in a confined, underground concrete bunker, was an inherently perilous task. Ventilation was a constant challenge. The risk of catastrophic explosion from an HTP leak or mishap was ever present. While no single massive explosion destroyed Proteus during the war, numerous accidents and near misses occurred. The psychological strain on the crews working in this claustrophobic, high-stakes environment, constantly aware that a tiny spark or contamination could vaporize them, must have been immense. Proteus stands today, a decaying, water-filled hulk, a stark, brutalist reminder of the extreme risks undertaken in the secretive, pressurized world of wartime innovation, where the building itself became a potential tomb for those working within its unforgiving walls. The 20th and 21st centuries brought new materials, new scales, and new kinds of dangers, sometimes unforeseen until it was tragically too late. In the heart of London stands Grenfell Tower, a 24-story residential apartment block, clad in sleek, modern panels. It represented post-war social housing. Its transformation into an inferno on June 14, 2017, exposed a terrifying chain of failures that turned a home into a death trap for 72 people. The danger stemmed from a catastrophic combination of factors. The building's exterior was clad in highly combustible aluminum composite material, ACM, panels with a flammable polyethylene core, essentially plastic sandwiched between thin aluminum sheets. This cladding acted like a wick when a small fridge fire broke out in a fourth-floor apartment. The fire breached the window, ignited the cladding, and raced up the exterior at terrifying speed, bypassing the building's compartmentalization design, meant to contain fires within single flats. Flames and superheated smoke poured back into apartments through windows and the newly revealed gaps around them. Internal fire doors failed. The single stairwell, the only escape route for most residents, quickly filled with toxic smoke. Firefighting was hampered by inadequate equipment and water pressure. Residents were told to stay put, based on the flawed compartmentalization theory, advice that proved fatally wrong as the exterior cladding turned the entire tower into a vertical chimney. The materials used, chosen largely for cost and aesthetics over safety, combined with poor maintenance, inadequate regulations, ignored warnings from residents, and flawed emergency protocols, created a perfect storm. Grenfell wasn't an ancient death trap. It was a modern building, recently refurbished, that became a blazing coffin due to systemic neglect and the prioritization of profit and appearance over fundamental safety. Its charred skeleton remains a devastating scar on the London skyline and a horrifying symbol of institutional failure. Sometimes, the danger isn't fire or collapse, but an invisible, lingering poison. Lafarge Cement Plant, Hagerstown, Maryland, formerly known as the Dustin Plant. Cement plants are inherently dusty places, but the Dustin Plant gained infamy for the lethal legacy of one specific additive, asbestos. For decades, From the 1930s through the 1970s, workers mixed raw asbestos fibers into cement products at this plant. Asbestos, valued for its heat resistance and strength, is also a known carcinogen. When its microscopic fibers are inhaled, they can lodge deep in the lungs, causing devastating diseases like asbestosis, scarring, lung cancer, and mesothelioma, aggressive cancers of the lung and abdominal linings, that often take decades to appear. At the Dustin plant, workers handled raw asbestos in bulk, often with little to no protection. Dust filled the air they breathed, settled on their clothes, and was carried home to their families. Ventilation was inadequate. Masks, if provided, were rudimentary. Management, aware of the risks by the mid-20th century, scientific evidence mounted steadily, often downplayed, or concealed the dangers. The very building, its mixing floors, bagging areas, storage silos, became saturated with asbestos dust. Workers weren't just in a dangerous building, they were immersed in the danger itself. With every breath, the death toll wasn't immediate, it unfolded over generations. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of workers and their family members ultimately succumbed to asbestos-related diseases, linked to their exposure at this single facility. The plant, under different ownership now, with vastly improved safety, stands as a grim monument to the long latency period of industrial disease and the devastating human cost, when profit is prioritized over the most basic protection from a known killer. The pursuit of scientific advancement, even energy, can create uniquely hazardous environments. Building 30 at the Mayak Production Association, near Ozyorsk, Russia, is arguably one of the most dangerous buildings ever conceived. Built in the late 1940s as part of the Soviet nuclear weapons program, its purpose was the reprocessing of irradiated nuclear fuel, extracting plutonium. This wasn't just a building, it was the epicenter of a radioactive hellscape. Mayak's early operations were characterized by staggering levels of environmental contamination and disregard for worker safety. But Building 30 housed the most volatile processes. It contained massive tanks storing highly radioactive liquid nuclear waste. The cooling systems for these tanks were primitive and unreliable. On September 29, 1957, the cooling system on one tank failed. The temperature soared, leading to a massive chemical explosion of the dried nitrate salts within. While not a nuclear explosion, it was immensely powerful, equivalent to about 7,100 tons of TNT. The blast blew the 160-ton concrete lid off the tank, and spewed an estimated 20 million curies of radioactive material, mostly strontium-90 and cesium-137, high into the atmosphere. This was the Kyshtym disaster, the third worst nuclear accident in history after Chernobyl and Fukushima. The building itself was heavily damaged and rendered unusable. The surrounding area, the East Urals radioactive trace, EURT, remains heavily contaminated to this day. Workers involved in the cleanup received lethal doses of radiation. Building 30, even in its ruined state, represents the extreme apex of industrial danger, a place where the materials handled were so inherently unstable and toxic that an accident wasn't just possible, it was almost inevitable, given the operational practices, and its consequences were catastrophic and enduring. It's a chilling testament to the perils of nuclear technology, pushed to its limits under a veil of secrecy. No discussion of dangerous buildings is complete without confronting the ultimate modern monument to technological catastrophe, Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, Unit 4. The reactor itself, housed within a massive concrete structure, became the epicenter of the world's worst nuclear disaster. On April 26, 1986, the danger here was multifaceted and unprecedented. The RBMK reactor design had inherent flaws, notably a positive void coefficient that made it unstable at low power. A poorly designed safety test, coupled with operator errors born from inadequate training and a culture that discouraged questioning, triggered a catastrophic power surge. The resulting explosions blew the 2,000-ton biological shield off the reactor core, ruptured the building, and exposed the superheated, disintegrating core to the atmosphere. Graphite moderator burned fiercely. Radioactive debris rained down on the roof and surrounding areas. The building became a source of unimaginable levels of radiation, lethal within minutes in certain areas. Firefighters who first responded, unaware of the true nature of the disaster, absorbed fatal doses battling fires on the roof. Helicopter pilots attempting to dump sand and boron on the open core flew through highly radioactive plumes. The immediate structure was shattered and lethally radioactive. The hastily constructed sarcophagus, object shelter, built over the ruins in extreme conditions was itself a dangerous, temporary structure prone to potential collapse and leakage. It has since been encased by the massive new safe confinement, NSC, an engineering marvel designed to last a century and allow for the eventual dismantling of the ruins. Unit 4, entombed within the NSC, remains a seething, radioactive tomb. It represents the extreme danger of complex technological systems failing catastrophically, the hubris of believing such systems could be perfectly controlled, and the creation of a building so hazardous it required another, even larger building just to contain its poison for generations. The ghost town of Pripyat nearby stands as a silent, chilling testament to the speed and totality with which such danger can erase a community. Our journey reveals a sobering pattern. The deadliest buildings weren't always those on the verge of collapse. Their danger stemmed from, number 1, hubris and ambition, pushing engineering limits without understanding the true cost, pyramids, cathedrals. Number 2, deliberate negligence and profit motive, prioritizing cost-cutting, aesthetics, or production speed over fundamental safety, Triangle Factory, radium factories, Grenfell Tower, asbestos plants. Number 3, invisible threats, materials or processes whose lethal nature was unknown, ignored, or concealed, radium, asbestos, radiation, MIAC, Chernobyl. Number 4, extreme purpose, housing inherently volatile substances or processes under immense pressure, HMS Proteus, MIAC, Chernobyl. Number 5, systemic failure, a cascade of poor design, inadequate regulations, ignored warnings, and flawed emergency response, Grenfell, Chernobyl. These structures stand, or once stood, as grim monuments to moments when human ambition, greed, ignorance, or desperation catastrophically outweighed the imperative of safety. They remind us that buildings are not neutral containers. They are expressions of our values, priorities, and sometimes, our darkest flaws. The legacy of these dangerous buildings is complex. Some, like the Triangle Fire and the Radium Girls, spurred revolutionary safety reforms and labor protections. Others, like Chernobyl and MIAC, cast long radioactive shadows, forcing a global reckoning with nuclear power's risks. Grenfell Tower is a raw, ongoing indictment of regulatory failure and social neglect. The pyramids and cathedrals remind us of the immense, often brutal, human cost behind our greatest wonders. As we look at modern scalenes and gleaming new constructions, the lessons scream from the pages of history. Vigilance is eternal. Complacency is deadly. Regulations born from past tragedies are not red tape, they are written in blood. The pursuit of innovation, profit, or grandeur must never again be allowed to eclipse the fundamental right to safety within the walls we build and inhabit. The most dangerous building may yet be unbuilt, or perhaps, through the hard-won lessons of history, we can ensure it remains a relic of a more perilous past. The choice, as always, rests in our hands. Thank you for joining this sobering exploration of history's most dangerous buildings. Remember the cost, learn the lessons, and build a safer future.